Hey, Guoba here. Is your damage looking like this? Do you want it to instead look like this? Well, that's an exaggeration, but today we'll be looking at how damage works and how we boost damage in every single way. So first, an in-depth guide on the damage formula, then we'll go through all the ways we can boost this damage as well as how effective these boosts are. For example, we will see how strong damage percent is versus attack percent, including any additional damage percent if you already have a ton. Another example we will look at is how efficient crit ratios are, as well as how speed substats fare versus crit substats, and how well defense shred and resistance shred boost our damage, and much more. This is a mega DPS boosting guide that I have made with my friend Justice, so if you could comment "Thanks Justice," that would be awesome. If you want to contribute to similar TC projects in the future, you can tag along by joining my Discord. And finally, if you'd like this guide and want more, consider liking and subscribing. It helps out a bunch, and I'll be doing more in-depth guides on game mechanics in the future. Anyway, let's begin. First things first, let's look at the good old classic damage formula. It is composed of 7 different elements, but some formulas will also show 8. We have 3 elements that we can affect by boosting our characters, and 4 elements that depend on the enemies and how we affect them. So for character dependent elements, we have our base damage, the crit multiplier, and the damage boost multiplier. First we have our base damage, which is the skill multiplier multiplied by the scaling stat, plus any additional damage. Xela's ultimate at level 10 for example does 425% of her attack, meaning her ultimate's base damage will be 4.25 times her total attack, which at 3k attack would be 12,750 damage. If it scales off HP or defense or anything else, you use those values instead, multiplied by their respective skill multiplier. We then have the crit multiplier. So if you crit, your base damage will be multiplied by this crit multiplier, which is equal to 1 plus your crit damage percentage. So if you have 100% crit damage, your crit multiplier is 2, and your base damage will be doubled upon critting. To find your average damage, you multiply your base damage by your crit rate and your crit multiplier, and add to your base damage multiplied by 1 minus your crit rate. You're basically adding the damage of a crit with the damage of a non-crit, respectively multiplied by their chances to happen. At a crit ratio of 80 to 160, with our same ultimate damage from before, we do the following calculation, giving us an average damage of 29,070. Next we have the damage boost multiplier. Any damage percent bonuses are totaled up and added to the base multiplier of 1, which will then multiply your damage again. You have general damage percent bonuses that work on all attacks, like Bronya's damage boost on her skill. Then you have specific damage percent bonuses, like Subscribe for More, which are only taken into account on basic attacks or skills. Or another example is elemental damage percent bonuses, which only work when said attack is of the corresponding element. If for example, we have a quantum damage percent orb on our Xela, and at talent at level 10 we have a damage percent boost of 118.9%, and we thus multiply our previous damage by 2.189, giving us now 63,634.23 damage, which won't show as that in game, the values are rounded. Next we're on to the enemy multipliers, which are the defense multiplier, the resistance multiplier, the vulnerability multiplier, and finally the broken multiplier, and this broken multiplier is part of a universal damage reduction multiplier that enemies have. The defense multiplier is first, is calculated by a division. The numerator is your character level plus 20, the denominator is the enemy's level plus 20, and this is multiplied by 1 minus any defense reduction or ignore effects. This is then added onto your character's level again plus 20. What this basically means is your defense multiplier depends on 2 things, the level difference between you and the enemy as well as any defense reduction or ignore effects. At the same level as your enemy, you're dividing your level by your level times 2 essentially, so your defense multiplier is 0.5 and your damage is halved. As the enemy level increases, the denominator increases and your multiplier drops. This is why we calculate with a defense multiplier of about 0.476, because we're level 80 versus level 90 enemies. As we include defense reduction, the enemy level is multiplied by a smaller and smaller number, increasing our division's final multiplier until we hit 100% defense reduction, where we'll now be dividing your level by your level, giving us a defense multiplier of 1. And defense reduction does not go further than 100%. Versus level 90 enemy with a level 80 Xela equipped with the 4-piece quantum set, we will ignore 20% of their defense and multiply our damage by this long number, dropping our damage to 33,848. The second enemy multiplier is the resistance multiplier. You have the base resistance multiplier of 1, and then you subtract the subtraction of the enemy resistance with your resistance reduction or penetration. So if the enemy has 20% resistance, you get a resistance multiplier of 0.8. If they have 40%, multiplier of 0.6, etc. If you have resistance reduction, you are removing this initial resistance, and any further reduction still counts towards your resistance multiplier, now boosting your damage. If you have 20% resistance reduction on an enemy with 20% resistance, They now have 0% resistance and your multiplier is back at 1. If they have 0% resistance, your multiplier is now at 1.2 and so your damage is increased. This is why we generally bring DPS to an enemy with a weakness corresponding to our DPS's type, since any enemy that is weak to an element has 0% resistance to that element, and so your base resistance multiplier is 1. Including Zila's A4, which gives us 20% resistance pen, versus a quantum weak enemy, we now have a resistance multiplier of 1.2 on our damage, increasing our damage to 40,617.6. Next up is a very simple one, the vulnerability multiplier, which is indicated by text saying increased damage received or increased damage taken by enemies, like Welt's A2 or Silverwolf's signature light cone. You have a base multiplier of 1 and any vulnerability modifiers will increase it by their respective percentages. So we have Welt on the team with his 12% vulnerability, we multiply our damage thus far by 1.12, increasing our damage to 45,491.7. Finally, we have the broken multiplier, which is part of enemy's total damage reduction and is dependent on the toughness bar. The broken multiplier is 0.9 when the enemy has a toughness bar and 1 when they don't. So you gain a 1.1 times damage increase if you hit a broken enemy. Meaning if you can save that juicy ultimate for when the enemy is broken, it'll give a final nice boost. Now onto how we boost our damage. For an easy summary, we boost our damage by boosting each of these multipliers. So we increase our trace level or scaling factor for our base damage, we increase our crit ratio for our crit multiplier, and we add damage percent buffs for our damage. Applying def reduction debuffs or gaining def percent ignore will boost our defense multiplier. Same with resistance reduction for our resistance multiplier. Inflicting vulnerability will boost our damage too, and finally breaking enemy's toughness bar will grant us more damage. But then comes the question of balancing stats and how much attack percent I should have, how much crit should I have, is damage percent better than attack percent, and what if I have 100% damage already? And that is what part 2 of this guide will explain. Our first comparison is damage percent versus attack percent. This also works for any scaling factor like HP percent on Blade. And no buffs, damage percent beats attack percent due to characters and light cones having a base attack, and the gloves relic piece having a flat 352 attack. As we can see on this chart, 10% of damage is worth a lot more than 10% of attack. This only further increases as we add attack percent buffs and main stats to our units. Adding attack percent main stats skews the difference in favor of damage even more. If we only add a damage percent orb instead, attack percent becomes a bit stronger than damage percent, which is normal. However, for a DPS we will naturally be building a lot of attack percent, and damage percent only comes from the orbs, set bonuses, ally buffs and light cones. Attack percent can be on the chest, boosts, orb, rope, and also comes from a ton of different set bonuses and ally buffs. You also have base attack on the light cones. So as you can see, true attack main stats makes damage percent very favourable even with a damage percent orb. Even with a 66% damage percent buff from Bronze's skill, it still comes out ahead. Damage percent versus crit percent is similar, except they are both multipliers onto your base damage. Crit also has the problem of only being valuable if you have enough of it. As you can see from no damage percent or crit buffs or pieces, 100% damage is equal to an additional crit ratio of 55 to 110 in boosting your damage. Getting a better crit ratio improves the damage boosting capabilities of more crit, but it also doesn't mean damage percent should be wasted. With a lot of damage percent, crit becomes very valuable, but so does crit with a lot of extra damage percent. Finally, in this three-way matchup, we have attack percent versus crit, which is compared in increments of 2 substats, so 2 attack percent subs versus 1 crit rate and 1 crit damage sub. This is, by the way, considering a base crit of 5 to 50. So as you can see, crit stats without initial crit is useless, and attack percent is favoured even after 2 main stats. Now if we have a favourable crit ratio, any additional crit stats are worth a lot more. So don't go adding some crit to a unit when you won't hit a high enough ratio for it to be worth it. This also shows that DPS do want crit, as attack percent is pretty saturated, and it's why we go crit chests on our DPS to avoid any DPS loss. Now onto crit efficiency. This one is a classic from Genshin and just shows, depending on your crit rate or crit damage, how effective extra crit damage or rate is to the perfect 1 to 2 ratio. This shows that, for example, 50 crit rate to 100 crit damage is a nice ratio. But having extra crit rate or extra crit damage won't impact your ratio too much, and you shouldn't get too worked up over the perfect crit ratio. We can also see this in average crit multiplier, which is how we find our average damage, dependent on our crit rate and crit damage. We used this earlier in the Zeta calculation to find our average ultimate damage. As you see at the base 5 to 50 crit ratio characters have, our average damage is not increasing by much at all. But we also see that whilst the perfect ratio will boost our damage by the most amount, not having a 1 to 2 ratio is still fine for damage. Now we're onto speed and their comparisons. Remember just before this that speed varies a lot, and speed can make tuning buffs better or worse, and this is just showcasing how effective speed is for DPS turns and damage gain. Speed has a lot of different nuances to it, and this isn't an end all be all. So first we have the standard speed breakpoints, which you have probably already seen from Grimro. It shows how to get additional actions per cycle in the first 8 cycles. For example, if we want 10 actions by the 6th cycle, we need 154 speed. This also shows the infamous 134 speed breakpoint that gives us an additional action every 3 cycles, including the first cycle. So we get 2 actions in our first cycle, and then 6 in our 4th, and so on and so forth. As for effective damage gain, we compare how many actions we get to the standard 1 action per 1 cycle. So getting 2 actions by the first cycle is a 100% damage gain, but 3 actions by the second cycle is only a 50% damage gain, since you're already supposed to have 2 actions. This doesn't mean you should just go for 161 speed for a breakpoint for some damage gain, it just shows the potential. To further showcase that going just for speed is bad for DPS, we now have 2 comparisons, and that is speed substats versus attack subs and speed versus crit. These are also my favorite comparisons since they show the breakpoints really well. Speed versus attack shows 1 minimum sub of speed versus 1 minimum sub of attack. Obviously having more attack will win until you hit a speed breakpoint, and having stats is important too. Going for just speed for more turns won't give you much gains unless you have the stats to do damage. This also shows how important speed boots are for DPS gains, but that too much speed is unneeded as well. With attack percent buffs and a main stat, getting an additional attack main stat does not prove as significant as speed boots, since we get our damage multiplied by more over 8 cycles, and we are close to a future breakpoint for even more damage. Speed versus crit is the same concept, but with the added nuance of crit needing a good ratio to be worth in the first place. If you hit breakpoints, it's great, but so is the value of crit for your damage. You'll be needing a good crit ratio in the first place, but getting extra crit is very valuable for damage. Now let's look at defense shred. As we saw with the formula earlier, and as we can see in this graph, it's an exponential DPS increase as you stack more and more defense shred. Pella's ultimate, for example, gives us a 26.5% damage boost and Silverwolf's Talon ult a 38.4%. But combined they give us a 95% damage boost, showing how effective defense reduction stacking is. Resistance shred gives us a linear boost instead, but we can see the value of resistance shred for our resistance multiplier. The more resistance the enemy has, the more gain we get from resistance shred, but since we aren't bringing our DPS to a fully resistant enemy, this doesn't mean much for us. We can see with the second chart that we want to be fighting enemies of our elemental weakness for the most damage. Now let's compare defense reduction and resistance reduction in their effect on multiplying our damage. Versus a weak enemy, defense shred comes out ahead of course, but takes time to ramp up versus resistance shred, which is linear. Also remember, defense shred can max out and resistance shred does not, so having a combination of both will improve our damage a ton. We can also see, for example, how effective Silverwolf is in boosting our damage. Versus a non-weak enemy, we get a 95.53% damage boost to our damage, which can also boost our whole team's damage. Combined with Zila's A4 and the quantum set, our damage goes even more insane. Adding vulnerability is an additional multiplier and is very simple. Every percent of vulnerability multiplies our damage by an additional percent. It is linear and having it on the enemy is great for damage boosting. We then have the broken multiplier and its effect on our DPS. It's even smaller than vulnerability in its complexity. You either gain 11% DPS from attacking a broken enemy, or you lose 10% potential DPS by not attacking a broken enemy. So again, try to hit them when their toughness bar is broken, but it's okay if you don't, it's just an additional boost of DPS. So that's all the damage multipliers for standard damage and how they fare versus each other. Let's also quickly look at break damage and how it scales on our level. A full damage over time mechanic guide along with the new break effect guide will also be coming in the future. So break damage scales exponentially on our level and is why it was so slept on in the early game. It still won't beat out standard DPS builds unless you break a lot, which is always tricky to assume and calculate. If your base multipliers aren't good anyway, then break damage can be amazing. For example, for someone like Asa that does a lot of toughness damage but not a lot of base damage. Level is very important for break damage as demonstrated in the second graph. Going from level 40 to 50 gives us a 113% damage increase on our break damage at level 40, which is compounded onto future levels. So even though from level 70 to 80 we get another 41.66% increase, that's a 41.66% increase on our break damage from level 70, which is a 62% increase over the break damage from level 60 and so on. With future break effect supports and buffs, break effect will be very strong. But again, a full guide will come on break effect. So if you have any additional suggestions for this make sheet, let me know in the comments or in my Discord. If you like this guide, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you could type thanks Justice in the comments, that would be awesome. Thanks for watching, thank you so much to all my amazing members, and have a Guoba day.